Hi, guys, and thanks for tuning in. Tonight we're going to travel through history's strangest, most ill advised weight loss trends. The ones that make you wonder how anyone thought, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Some are laughable, some are dangerous, and a few are disturbingly effective. But before we begin, if you like this video, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe. And without further ado, let's get started. Imagine swallowing tapeworm eggs on purpose, or eating nothing but vinegar and hoping the nausea burns off a few pounds, or strapping yourself into a vibrating machine that promises to shake the fat away while you just stand there. For as long as people have cared about their bodies, we've been willing to try some truly ridiculous and sometimes dangerous ways to lose weight. And history, it's absolutely full of them. This isn't just a modern fad problem. We're talking about centuries of strange diets, bizarre machines, and questionable miracle cures, all backed by the authority of either a sketchy salesman, a misunderstood scientific theory, or a wealthy influencer from the past. From the Victorian chew every bite 100 times movement to the 1920s cigarette ads that told you to reach for a Lucky instead of a sweet, humans have turned desperation into an art form. So buckle up, sip your definitely not vinegar beverage, and let's take a trip through the weird world of historical weight loss, where science, vanity, and sheer absurdity collide. All right. Let's start our bizarre journey with one of history's most infamous weight loss solutions, the tapeworm diet. Yes, exactly what it sounds like. The idea was simple, and by simple, I mean horrifying. You swallow a capsule containing a tapeworm egg. The egg hatches inside your intestines, and the worm grows, and it supposedly eats your food for you. And then, voila! Weight loss without lifting a finger or a dumbbell. This trend took off in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially among upper class and aspiring middle class women who were chasing the era's fashionable wasp waist look. This was the same crowd squeezing into corsets so tight they could barely breathe. So the tapeworm pill was just another extreme option in their beauty toolkit. You could supposedly order these quote-unquote sanitized tapeworm capsules through mail order ads in women's magazines and newspapers. Some were sold under the charming name Flesh Form Reducer, because nothing says trustworthy medical product like a label that sounds like it came from a mad scientist's garage. Prices varied, but the equivalent today would be anywhere from $10 to $30 a pill. Not exactly cheap, but still affordable enough. Well, at least for women desperate to fit the beauty standard of the day. And of course, they were often advertised as safe and scientifically proven, because back then, slopping science on something was like today's clinically tested, utterly meaningless, but great for sales. The ads never really mentioned the exit strategy. I mean, sure, the worm eats for you, but what happens when you've reached your weight goal? Do you thank it for its service and send it off with a gold watch? No, you have to evict it. And that process, well, let's just say it's not something you want to describe before dinner. Now maybe you're thinking, that's disgusting. I'd never swallow a parasite. Well, fair enough. But don't worry, history has plenty of less horrifying, yet equally ridiculous options. Let's meet Horace Fletcher, the man who decided the key to health and weight loss was chewing. Like, a lot. In the early 1900s, Fletcher was an American, wealthy businessman who wasn't exactly in top shape. After being told he was too unhealthy to get life insurance, he set out to fix himself, not by exercising or changing what he ate, but by reinventing how he ate. So, what was his method? Chew every single bite of food exactly 32 times or more. Fletcher himself claimed to chew some bites over 100 times until they basically turned into liquid before swallowing. He said this maximized nutrition absorption and prevented overeating. And somehow, this idea caught on, not just with the public, but with celebrities, athletes, and even John D. Rockefeller, one of the richest men in history, who was reportedly a devout Fletcherizer. The diet was particularly appealing to upper and middle class, health-conscious folks who loved the idea that they could eat whatever they wanted, as long as they chewed it into oblivion. Fletcher wrote books, went on lecture tours, and marketed his chewing method as the path to perfect health and natural weight loss. He promised you'd have more energy, better digestion, and my favorite claim, a sweet breath. Because apparently in the early 1900s, bad breath was the leading cause of social exile. But here's the thing. Eating a meal this way could take hours. Imagine going out to dinner with a group of Fletchenizers. You'd finish your soup before they were halfway through their first crouton. And while Fletcher swore by the benefits, modern nutritionists say it wasn't the chewing itself that made people lose weight. It was the fact that after 2 hours of gnawing on a sandwich, you would just give up and stop eating. And honestly, Fletcherizing might work out today too. Not for health reasons, but because your dinner companions would stop inviting you out. And without social dinners, you'd probably cut your calorie intake in half. Now, if the idea of spending 2 hours chewing a single piece of bread sounds exhausting, the 1920s had a weight loss method that required even less effort. Just smoke instead of eat. During the Roaring Twenties, cigarette companies realized women were a rapidly growing market, and that many of them were obsessed with staying slim. Enter Lucky Strike's now infamous slogan, reach for a Lucky instead of a sweet. Yes, they were literally telling women to swap dessert for nicotine. The logic? Well, if you can call it that, was that smoking suppressed appetite, so you could control your weight without having to say no to anything, except oxygen. Lucky Strike's ad campaigns were massive, plastering glamorous, slim women across newspapers and magazines, all crediting their figures to cigarettes. They even hired Hollywood stars and beauty pageant winners to endorse the habit. It was marketed as chic, modern, and believe it or not, healthy. The ads didn't just promise weight loss. They claimed smoking could keep a slender figure and make you more socially attractive, because apparently nothing says romance like reeking of tobacco smoke and coughing mid-flirt. This trend was especially popular among young urban women in flapper culture, the kind breaking social norms by bobbing their hair, wearing shorter skirts, and now publicly puffing away. It became part of the rebellious fashion image. Of course, what they didn't mention was that while you might lose a few pounds, you were also trading them for a hacking cough, yellow teeth, and a significantly higher risk of dying early. But hey, at least your dress fit. It's kind of wild to think about it. In the 1920s, smoking was sold as a wellness habit. In today's terms, it's like a fast food chain running ads saying, eat a burger for better skin. If smoking your way to a smaller waist wasn't quite your thing, how about drinking something so acidic it could strip paint? Let's talk about the vinegar diet, made famous in the early 1800s by one of the most dramatic poets of all time, Lord Byron. Byron was basically the original tortured celebrity influencer. He was wildly famous, scandalous, and according to most accounts, deeply insecure about his weight. Determined to stay slim, he adopted a bizarre daily ritual, drinking large quantities of vinegar mixed with water, often alongside black tea and the occasional raw egg. Byron claims the vinegar could purify the body and help burn fat. In reality, it mostly made people nauseous, suppressed their appetite, and in some cases caused serious stomach problems and tooth enamel erosion. Basically, it worked because you felt too sick to eat, which is not exactly a sustainable health plan. Because Byron was a cultural icon, his habits caught on, especially among young, upper-class women in Britain and Europe who idolized his brooding, romantic image. These were people who wanted not just to look slim, but to look pale, delicate, and faintly tragic, which the vinegar diet conveniently delivered. Vinegar was easy to get, and it was cheap, so this was one of the more accessible weight loss methods of the time. You didn't need to be rich to try it, just willing to spend your day smelling like a pickle barrel. Honestly, Byron might have been the first person in history to make smelling vaguely like salad dressing a fashion statement. And given how much vinegar he drank, it's possible his internal organs were as well preserved as a jar of pickles. So far, we've had parasites, endless chewing, nicotine, and vinegar. But in the early to mid 20th century, technology decided to get involved. And that's when weight loss started to look a lot like something out of a cartoon. Enter the vibrating belt machine, the exercise device for people who didn't want to actually exercise. The setup was simple. You'd stand on a platform, wrap a wide cloth or leather belt around your waist or hips or your thighs, and the machine would shake you. The idea was that the vibrations would break up fat and tone your muscles without you moving a muscle yourself. It was essentially the fitness equivalent of letting your washing machine do the work while you just stood there. These machines first appeared in gyms, spas, and beauty salons in the 1920s and stayed popular through the 1960s. They were especially marketed towards women who were told that sweating was unladylike, so instead, they could stand gracefully in place while the machine did the work. It was sold as glamorous, futuristic way to slim down without breaking a sweat, or even messing up your hair. Advertisements promised quick results and often featured models smiling blissfully while being violently jiggled. You could find these machines in reducing salons, the vintage version of today's boutique fitness studios, where you might pay a few dollars per session, or buy a home model if you had the space and money. Of course, there was no actual fat-burning magic happening. At best, it was like getting a slightly aggressive massage. At worst, it was a total waste of time and money. But people loved it because it felt like they were doing something without the discomfort of, actually doing something. Honestly, if vibrating belts worked, we could all just ride the bus down a bumpy road and call it a workout. If standing still in a vibrating belt machine was too much physical effort for you, don't worry. History has a weight loss plan that literally requires no effort at all. In fact, it requires you to be unconscious. Let's talk about the Sleeping Beauty diet. The idea was painfully simple. You can't eat if you're asleep. So if you wanted to lose weight, you would sleep as much as possible, sometimes for days at a time. Yes, the diet plan was essentially hibernate like a bear, and then you wake up thinner. The concept floated around for decades, but it became especially notorious in the 1960s and 70s. It wasn't about just napping a little bit longer. Some people reportedly used sedatives or sleeping pills to knock themselves out for extended periods of time. A dangerous twist that turned dieting into a medically risky endurance nap. It was rumored that even Elvis Presley tried a version of the Sleeping Beauty diet in his later years of life, allegedly spending days at a time sedated so he wouldn't eat. That connection to celebrity culture made it both infamous and bizarrely appealing to certain people looking for a quick fix. This wasn't the kind of diet you could buy in a box or find in a woman's magazine. It was more of an underground, whispered about fad, often involving questionable medical supervision, aka a shady doctor with a prescription pad. The cost? Potentially hundreds of dollars for the sedatives, and your long-term health. Extended sedation can cause muscle loss, heart problems, and serious dependency on sleeping pills, not to mention the risk of never waking up at all. Plus, when you do wake up, your body often craves energy-dense foods to make up for lost time, so any weight loss might not last. I mean, if this actually worked long-term, bears would be walking out of hibernation ready for swimsuit season. But spoiler alert, they're not exactly rocking six-packs. If sleeping for days to avoid eating sounds extreme, Victorian England had a weight loss trend that was, well, deadly in a much more literal way. Let's talk about the time people unknowingly were taking arsenic to lose weight. In the mid to late 19th century, arsenic was everywhere, in cosmetics, wallpaper, even children's toys. And it was also making its way into so-called health tonics and diet pills. The idea was that small doses of arsenic could boost your metabolism, curb your appetite, and make your skin appear paler, which was the fashionable beauty ideal of the day. These pills were essentially popular among upper and middle class women who were chasing that ethereal, delicate look, thin frame, pale complexion, the whole "I'm so fragile I might faint at any moment" aesthetic. Victorian culture didn't exactly value looking robust and athletic. They valued looking like you just survived a particularly poetic illness. You could buy arsenic wafers or arsenic complexion pills over the counter from chemists, no questions asked. Ads promised a refined figure and clear, youthful skin. Prices were cheap enough that even lower-income women sometimes bought them, unknowingly investing in their own slow poisoning. Of course, arsenic is a cumulative poison, meaning it builds up in your body over time. Symptoms of long-term use included vomiting, hair loss, organ damage, and ultimately death. And yet, because the danger wasn't widely understood, many women kept taking them right up until their mystery illness put them in the ground. It's honestly wild that in Victorian era you could walk into a pharmacy and buy poison as a diet aid, but if you showed your ankle in public, you were the scandal of the neighborhood. And there you have it, a whirlwind tour of humanity's most absurd, dangerous, and downright baffling weight loss trends. We've covered parasites, obsessive chewing, chain smoking, drinking vinegar like it's a fine wine, standing in a vibrating belt contraption, sleeping for days, and literally ingesting poison, all in the name of fitting into whatever beauty ideal society was setting at the time. Looking back, it's easy to laugh and think, wow, people back then were ridiculous. But here's the thing. 100 years from now, people are going to look back at us and say the same exact thing. They'd pull up old Instagram ads for detox teas and juice cleanses and shake their heads like, they really thought that worked? So maybe the real lesson here is this. Fads come and go, but human desperation to look just right never really changes. And if history has taught us anything, it's that sometimes the most ridiculous diet is the one we haven't invented yet. Until then, eat something you actually enjoy. Be kind to your body. And please, for the love of history, don't swallow a tapeworm. And while history's worst diets were busy wrecking people's insides, the fashion trends of the past were doing their best to wreck the outside. Because once you've starved yourself, poisoned yourself, or slept for a week to get the look, the next step is to squeeze, stretch, or even break parts of your body to make sure you really fit the beauty standard. Throughout history, fashion has been less about comfort and more about commitment, and sometimes that commitment means permanent damage. Whether it was flattening your ribcage into an unnatural shape, balancing in shoes you could barely walk in, or wearing accessories that could literally set you on fire, style has never been the faint of heart or the faint of common sense. In this next segment, we're diving into the most absurd, dangerous, and downright baffling fashion trends people have actually suffered through, all in the name of beauty. Some of these will make you laugh, some will make you cringe, and a few might make you genuinely wonder how anyone survived wearing them. So lace up your corset, powder your wig, and watch out for that open flame, because fashion history is about to get even more ridiculous. Let's start with one of the most infamous and extreme beauty practices in history, the tradition of lotus shoes in China. For centuries, tiny feet, sometimes as small as 3 inches, were considered the height of beauty and status among Chinese women. To achieve this, young girls, often between the ages of 4 and 9, would have their feet tightly bound in cloth, forcing the arch to break and the toes to curl under. Over time, this reshaped the foot into what was called a lotus foot. Small feet were seen as elegant, delicate, and a sign of wealth, because it meant you didn't have to do any physical labor. Walking in lotus shoes wasn't just difficult, it was extremely painful. But for many families, bound feet were considered essential for a girl's marriage prospects, so the practice, well, it endured for centuries. Lotus shoes were tiny, ornate slippers designed to show off these unnaturally small feet. They often featured embroidery, silk, and bright colors, making them look beautiful on the outside, while hiding the fact that the feet inside had been permanently deformed. The process caused lifelong pain, infections, and often left women unable to walk normally. But because beauty standards are ruthless, the suffering was considered worth it, a phrase that could basically be the tagline of every dangerous fashion trend in history. It's wild to think that somewhere, a man in the 17th century saw a woman hobbling toward him on 3-inch feet and thought, yes, perfection. And while lotus shoes kept women moving in tiny, careful steps, the early 20th century had its own version of mobility-limiting fashion, the hobble skirt. The hobble skirt was exactly what it sounds like, a skirt so narrow at the hem that it literally restricted your stride, forcing you to take tiny, shuffling steps. Imagine a pencil skirt, if the pencil was sharpened all the way to the tip. This style took off around 1910 and was inspired by a French designer who wanted to do away with the corset but still maintain a controlled, feminine silhouette. Instead of constricting the waist, he decided to constrict the legs. Progress? Well, that's debatable. Some say it was inspired by an American woman who had to tie her skirt with a rope while riding in the Wright brothers' airplane so it wouldn't blow upward. And apparently someone saw her waddling away from the plane and thought, yep, that's fashion. Hobble skirts looked elegant when standing still, but walking was an entire ordeal. Women could barely navigate stairs, run for streetcars, or cross the street without risk of tripping. Newspapers even reported a rise in hobble skirt accidents, where women fell or got tangled up. Honestly, calling it a hobble skirt feels almost too on the nose. It's like designing a shirt that strangles you and naming it the choke blouse. By the mid-1910s, the style loosened up, particularly because World War I demanded more practical clothing, and partly because women collectively realized that fashion shouldn't require the gait of a penguin. Now, while hobble skirts were tripping women up, men in the late 19th and early 20th centuries had their own dangerous fashion statement: the stiff, starched collar. These were detachable shirt collars made from fabric so heavily starched that they could stand upright like a piece of cardboard. The idea was to give men a crisp, formal look without having to wash the whole shirt. You just swapped out the collar. Practical in theory, but in practice, not so much. These collars were named father killers, and not just as a joke. The starch made them so rigid that if a man fell asleep or passed out while wearing one, the edge could press into his neck, cutting off his air supply. There were actual recorded cases of men dying from strangulation by fashion. They were considered a mark of professionalism and respectability, especially among businessmen. A floppy collar meant you were sloppy. A stiff, razor-sharp one meant that you were serious, successful, and possibly in mortal danger at all times. It's the only piece of clothing in history where you could genuinely ask, is that an accessory or a murder weapon? And the answer would be yes. By the 1920s, softer collars became fashionable, partly because of changing styles, and partly because, well, surprise, men didn't want to risk accidental death on the morning commute. While men were risking asphyxiation for fashion, women in the late 19th century were busy strapping furniture onto their backs. Let's talk about the bustle. The bustle was a padded understructure worn under the back of a woman's skirt to create an exaggerated, shelf-like rear silhouette. It first became popular in the 1870s after the crinoline craze had faded, and it was all about showcasing an hourglass figure, or in this case, more of a teacup on the side table shape. Bustles were made from padded fabric rolls, wire cages, and even spring mechanisms, all attached to a waistband. The skirt would drape over it, giving the illusion that your backside could comfortably double as a small reading desk. Sitting down in one was extremely awkward, to say the least. Women had to perch on the edge of chairs or risk crushing the frame. Walking through narrow doorways was tricky, and sitting in a carriage could turn into a logistical nightmare. The bustle wasn't just about body shape. It was a status symbol. If you could maneuver through life wearing one of these without toppling over, it meant you clearly weren't doing hard labor. Like many historical fashions, it shouted, "I'm rich enough to be wildly impractical." It's almost poetic that the Victorian era produced a garment that made your backside look big and made it impossible to use your backside for sitting. By the late 1880s, the bustle started to disappear as fashion shifted towards sleeker silhouettes, although it did make a few comebacks in early 20th century costume revival styles. If bustles made sitting a challenge, powdered wigs took the challenge of hygiene and fashion to a whole new level. Literally. Powdered wigs were elaborate, often towering hairstyles worn mostly by European aristocrats from the 17th through the 18th centuries. Made from human or horsehair, these wigs were powdered with white or gray starch to give them that iconic ghostly look. Originally, wigs were a way to cover up baldness or lice infestations, not exactly glamorous. But over time, they became a symbol of status, wealth, and power. The bigger and brighter your wig, the higher your social rank. The powder itself was often made from finely ground starch mixed with scents like lavender, because nothing says class like hiding the smell of bugs and dirt under layers of scented dust. Wigs were rarely washed. Instead, they were dusted and sometimes even soaked in vinegar or whiskey to keep the pests away. Wearing powdered wigs came with risks. The powder could irritate the skin and lungs, and the wigs were flammable. There were accounts of wigs catching fire from candles and causing serious injuries. Plus, the weight and heat made them uncomfortable and sometimes downright unbearable. Imagine spending hours styling a giant hair castle on your head, only to have it catch fire at dinner because someone lit a candle too close. Talk about a party crasher. By the late 18th century, powdered wigs fell out of fashion, partly due to changing tastes, and partly because the French Revolution made such displays of wealth, well, let's just say a little unpopular. So there you have it, a wild ride through some of the most ridiculous, dangerous, and downright baffling diets and fashion trends history has to offer. From swallowing tapeworms and sleeping your way to thinness, to hobbling around in skirts that could double as straitjackets, and wearing collars and wigs that could literally kill you. It's clear that human creativity knows no bounds when it comes to looking just right. We love to laugh at these past extremes, but they remind us of something important. The lengths people will go for beauty and acceptance are often extreme, sometimes deadly, and almost always a little crazy. And if you think these old trends sound nuts, just remember, today's health fads and fashion crazes are tomorrow's "what were they thinking" moments. So maybe the best style and diet advice is this: be kind to yourself, question the trends, and for goodness sake, don't put poison in your mouth or tie your feet too tight. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this historical deep dive into the wild side of beauty, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. What ridiculous trend should we cover next? Drop your ideas in the comments. And if you've made it this far and you're still awake, I'll keep the fire going a little bit longer for you, hoping that crackling embers will put you right to sleep. Thanks, and see you in the next one.